Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. Chapter 49. Monks and Mr. Brownlow at length meet, their conversation and the intelligence that interrupts it. The twilight was beginning to close in when Mr. Brownlow alighted from a hackney coach at his own door, and knocked softly. The door being opened, a sturdy man got out of the coach and stationed himself on one side of the steps, while another man, who had been seated on the box, dismounted too, and stood upon the other side. At a sign from Mr. Brownlow, they helped out a third man, and taking him between them, hurried him into the house. This man was Monks. They walked in the same manner up the stairs without speaking, and Mr. Brownlow, preceding them, led the way into a back room. At the door of this apartment, Monks, who had ascended with evident reluctance, stopped. The two men looked at the old gentleman as if for instructions. "He knows the alternative," said Mr. Brownlow. "If he hesitates or moves a finger but as you bid, drag him into the street, and call for the aid of the police, and impeach him as a felon in my name." "How dare you say this of me?" asked Monks. "How dare you urge me to it, young man?" replied Mr. Brownlow, confronting him with a steady look. "Are you mad enough to leave this house? Unhand him! There, sir. You are free to go, and we have to follow. But I warn you, by all I hold most solemn and most sacred, that instant will have you apprehended on a charge of fraud and robbery. I am resolute and immovable. If you are determined to be the same, your blood be upon your own head." "By what authority am I kidnapped in the street, and brought here by these dogs?" asked Monks, looking from one to the other of the men who stood beside him. "By mine," replied Mr. Brownlow. "Those persons are indemnified by me. If you complain of being deprived of your liberty, you had the power and opportunity to retrieve it as you came along, but you deemed it advisable to remain quiet. I say again, throw yourself for protection on the law. I will appeal to the law too, but when you have gone too far to recede, do not sue to me for leniency, when the power will have passed into other hands, and do not say that I plunged you down the gulf into which you rushed yourself." Monks was plainly disconcerted and alarmed besides. He hesitated. "You will decide quickly," said Mr. Brownlow with perfect firmness and composure. "If you wish me to prefer my charges publicly, and consign you to a punishment the extent of which, although I can, with a shudder, foresee, I cannot control, once more, I say, for you know the way. If not, and you appeal to my forbearance, and the mercy of those you have deeply injured, seat yourself, without a word, in that chair. It has waited for you 2 whole days." Monks muttered some intelligible words, but wavered still. "You will be prompt," said Mr. Brownlow. "A word from me, and the alternative has gone forever." Still the man hesitated. "I have not the inclination to parley," said Mr. Brownlow. "And, as I advocate the dearest interests of others, I have not the right." "Is there," demanded Monks with a faltering tongue, "is there no middle course?" "None." Monks looked at the old gentleman with an anxious eye, but reading in his countenance nothing but severity and determination, walked into the room, and shrugging his shoulders, sat down. "Lock the door on the outside," said Mr. Brownlow to the attendants, "and come when I ring." The men obeyed, and the two were left alone together. This is pretty treatment, sir," said Monks, throwing down his hat and cloak, "from my father's oldest friend." "It is because I was your father's oldest friend, young man," returned Mr. Brownlow. "It is because the hopes and wishes of young and happy years were bound up with him, and that fair creature of his blood, and kindred who rejoined her God in youth and left me here a solitary, lonely man. It is because he knelt with me beside his only sister's deathbed when he was yet a boy, on the morning that would, but heaven willed otherwise, have made her my young wife. It is because my seared heart clung to him. From that time forth, through all his trials and errors till he died, it is because old recollections and associations filled my heart, and even the sight of you brings with it old thoughts of him. It is because of all these things that I am moved to treat you gently now, yes, Edward Leeford, even now, and blush for your unworthiness to who bear that name. What has the name got to do with it? Asked the other, after contemplating half in silence, and half in dogged wonder, the agitation of his companion. What is the name to me? Nothing, replied Mr. Brownlow. Nothing to you, but it was hers, and even at this distance of time brings back to me, an old man, the glow and thrill which I once felt only to hear it repeated by a stranger. I'm very glad you have changed it, very, very. This is all mighty fine, said Monks, to retain his assumed designation, after a long silence, during which he had jerked himself in sullen defiance to and fro. And Mr. Brownlow had sat, shading his face with his hand. But what do you want with me? You have a brother, said Mr. Brownlow, rousing himself. A brother, the whisper of whose name in your ear, when I came behind you in the street, was, in itself, almost enough to make you accompany me hither in wonder and alarm. I have no brother, replied Monks. You know I was an only child. Why do you talk to me of brothers? You know that as well as I. Attend to what I do know, and you may not, said Mr. Brownlow. I shall interest you by and by. I know that of the wretched marriage into which family pride, and the most sordid and narrowest of all ambition, forced your unhappy father when a mere boy. You were the sole and most unnatural issue. I don't care for hard names, interrupted Monks with a jeering laugh. You know the fact, and that's enough for me. But I also know, pursued the old gentleman, the misery, the slow torture, the protracted anguish of that ill-assorted union. I know how listlessly and wearily each of that wretched pair dragged on their heavy chain through a world that was poison to them both. I know how cold formalities were succeeded by open taunts, how indifference gave place to dislike, dislike to hate, and hate to loathing, until at last they wrenched the clanking bound asunder, and retiring a wide space apart, and carried each a galling fragment of which nothing but death could break the rivets, to hide it in new society, beneath the gayest looks that could assume. Your mother succeeded, she forgot it soon, but it rusted and cankered at your father's heart for years. Well, they were separated, said Monks. And what of that? But they had been separated for some time, returned Mr. Brownlow. And your mother, wholly given up to continental frivolities, had utterly forgotten the young husband 10 good years her junior, who, with prospects blighted, lingered on at home. He fell among new friends. Excuse me, this is Mr. Brownlow's voice. This circumstance, at least, you know already. Not I, said Monks, turning away his eyes and beating his foot upon the ground, as a man who is determined to deny everything. Not I. Your manner, no less than your actions, assures me that you have never forgotten it, or ceased to think of it with bitterness, returned Mr. Brownlow. I speak of 15 years ago, when you were not more than 11 years old, and your father but 31, for he was, I repeat, a boy, when his father ordered him to marry. Must I go back to events which cast a shade upon the memory of your parent, or will you spare it and disclose to me the truth? I have nothing to disclose, rejoined Monks. You must talk on if you will. And we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care and thanks again.